Hey there internets, I'm Michael and this is Toucan Play That Game, and today I'm going to teach you how to play Dead of Winter. Now if you're interested in seeing an example of Dead of Winter being played, then please check out my next video, and of course if you're interested in finding out my thoughts and opinions on this game, and of course whether or not Toucan play this game, then please do check out my final video in this series, which will be my review of Dead of Winter. So with that out the way, let's take a look at Dead of Winter. So what is Dead of Winter? Well, let's look at the box. Well, we've got people and a kind of broken glass effect. Yeah, this box is giving me absolutely no idea what it's about. But you know what might help? Let's look at the side of the box. Ooh, zombie fingers. So yes, this is a zombie game. But it's not necessarily a zombie game in the way that you might be thinking. This game is not about running around, shooting zombies and outmaneuvering them in a kind of miniatures game kind of way. No, this game is more about managing resources in a cooperative traitor kind of way. So if you're playing with two people, it is a purely cooperative game. However, if you're playing with more than two people, you will have potentially a traitor. And a part of the game is trying to identify that traitor, but you don't need to. You could win even with the traitor playing against you. So if that's not very clear, I apologise, but why don't we take a look at the table and you'll get a better idea for what Dead of Winter is and how to play it. Welcome to the table for how to play Dead of Winter, a Crossroads game. In Dead of Winter, you will be controlling a group of survivors during the zombie apocalypse during the Dead of Winter. And your survivors will be sharing a colony with the other players' survivors. Now, your aim in this game will be for the colony to survive. Unless you're a betrayer. In which case, your objective could be anything. But I'm going to be showing you how to play a two-player game. And that actually means that this is a fully co-op experience. So there will be no secret objectives or betrayers in this. So let's get on with setting up the game. The first thing to do is to get your colony board and put it in the middle of the table. You can tell your colony board as it says the colony in the top left. You'll then need to set out the location cards. There are 6 of these and you can set them out however works best around the colony board for your table. Then give each player a player reference sheet that looks like this. If there's any doubt, it does say player reference on the back. And then just sit that in front of each player. Next, you'll need to pick your objective from the available objective cards. There are lots to choose from, and the top line will give you the name of the objective. The next section tells you the details for the setup for that. Then you've got the details of how to win that scenario, and then you've got how long that scenario takes. You can pick one at random if you wish, or you can pick one you particularly want to play because you've not done it before, for example. Also, please note that the backs have a hardcore mode marked with an exclamation mark. This is just a more difficult version, and it is recommended you use that version if you're playing co-op. So this being Toucan Play That Game and us setting up for a two-player game, we will be using the hardcore side, and additionally we will be using the We Need More Samples objective as recommended as your starting objective in the rulebook. Having picked your objective, you'll put it on the main objective space of the colony board. Next, we'll need to follow the setup steps that are on this objective card. So if we look at we need more samples, we'll need to set the morale at 6, the round track at 5, and add 3 zombies to all non-colony locations. So let's do the morale track first, which is down here on the colony board. And you have this blue ring in order to mark that. So we'll mark that at 6. And then we have this red ring for marking the rounds, which are tracked along the left here of the colony board. So we will simply mark that at 5. Then we need to put out the zombies that the objective card stated, which for this one was 3 zombies to all non-colony locations. So here is what one of the zombies looks like. These are cardboard tokens that stand up in little plastic stands, and they will sit on the locations here. So we'll put one like that, for example, and we'll put out the rest as well. That is then our zombies set out. Next, you'll need to make sure that you have all the relevant tokens handy near the board. So you'll want your food tokens, your Helpless Survivors, the noise tokens, the barricades, finally the wound tokens. Also, you will need to have the exposure dice nearby, and each player will need to be given 4 dice. Now, in a 3-player or more game, this would only be 3 dice, as it's equal to the number of survivors plus 1. You'll probably also need several of your zombies nearby ready. The next step of setup you can skip in a 2-player or cooperative game. However, I will go through it for those of you playing a 3 or more player game. So first you'll need to get your secret objective cards, and on some of them you'll have betrayal, and on others it'll just be blank at the bottom. So first thing to do is separate them so that you've got all the ones with betrayal and all the ones that are blank in separate piles. Then you're going to need to shuffle up all your blank ones and deal into a single pile 2 cards per player. Then take your betrayer objective cards and shuffle those up, and you're going to want to take one and add it to the pile of other objectives you dealt out. Then shuffle up that pile and deal 1 objective to each player. However, this is a 2-player co-op, so we can just get rid of these. Next, you're going to want to get your crisis cards with the bloody hand on the back. Shuffle these up and then place them on the crisis space on the colony board. Next, if you're playing with more than 2 players, you'll need to get your Exiled Objectives for if any players get exiled, and you'll just shuffle these up, then sit them near the board as a draw pile. Next, you're going to want to get your Survivors cards and shuffle these all up, and these are the cards that have silhouettes on the back and then the pictures of survivors on the front. Once you've shuffled them, just put them near the board as a draw pile. The next deck of cards to get ready is your Crossroads cards, and these are the ones with the yellowish back and the cross. So just shuffle these up and then put them near the board as your draw pile. So there's a few things to mention on the Crossroads cards. So the first thing is that all cards from the base game will have the Crossroads symbol in the bottom right corner. But also some cards will have the red circle with the white cross in, and this means it is a non-co-op card. So for a 2-player game, these will need removing from the deck. Secondly, some cards will contain this speech bubble symbol here, and that means that they contain adult themes, so you may want to remove them if you're playing with children. So the next thing you're going to want to do is separate out all your item cards, and you can tell the item cards because they have this magnifying glass symbol on the back. And you can tell which location each card belongs to as it's written on the bottom of the other side. So here we have a starter item card, so you'll separate based on that as well. So having separated your item cards into the 7 different decks, then take your starter item cards and shuffle those up. And then you're going to want to deal 7 cards to each player. This is because it's a 2-player game. If you were playing with 3 or more players, you'd only deal 5 cards to each player. As I said, the rest of the item decks have the location name at the bottom of the card, which corresponds to one of the non-colony locations. You'll then shuffle up each of these decks and put it on the corresponding location. So this police station one goes on the police station space, and you'll do the same for the rest of the locations. Next, you're going to want to deal out 4 survivors to each player. Of these 4 survivors, each player will pick 3 that they will keep as their survivors in the colony, and 1 will go back to the deck. Now, if you were playing with 3 or more players, you would be putting 2 back in the deck, not just 1. So let's talk about the structure of these survivors cards. At the top you have the name, then their occupation, and then on the right you have their leadership score, and then their fighting score, which is the number on a d6 they need in order to perform an attack. So in this case 4 or more. And then below that is their search score, works the same as fighting but for searching, so in this case 3 or more to search. Then at the bottom you have their special ability. The first thing this will tell you is where you can perform it. So for this card it can be done anywhere. Some will state specific locations. Then it will tell you what this special ability is, and lots of these are very different. Also, some of them, such as this one where it says colony, will then have a number in brackets. That represents the number of a dice that you need to use in order to use this ability. So this one you'd need a 1 or more, and you would expend a dice to your expended used pool in order to use this ability. So having picked the survivors you're keeping, you will then need to choose who is going to be your group leader. Now the first player will be decided by whose group leader has the highest leadership score. So in this situation, if you wanted to be going second or last, you would choose Loretta, who has the lowest leadership score out of these. So your group leader will sit to the left of your player mat, and your followers will sit below your player mat. Then, having picked your survivors, you'll need to find the corresponding standees using the picture as a guide. So here we have the Loretta standee, and once you've got these, you would then place them in the colony in the circles for colony occupants. Then, as I said, the first player will be the player whose group leader has the highest leadership score. And you'll give them the first player token, which is this nifty little dagger here. And that will just sit in the table in front of them. So, with everything set up for a 2-player game, your table should look something like this. At least for the "we need more samples" objective. So we have our colony board with our survivors on it. Then we have all our tokens and dice and cards. We have our locations with zombies on and item decks. Then we have our player areas, one of which has the first player token. So we have our group leaders and our followers and our hands of cards. And then the second player is just here. So with the game all set up, let's talk about now how you actually go about playing the game. So the first thing you're going to need to bear in mind is what your victory condition is, and of course this is going to vary depending on the objective card you're using. So here the victory condition is to accumulate 4 zombies on the main objective card for each player that started the game. So that'll mean we'd need 8, and how we get those zombies is every time a zombie is killed, we'll roll a dice. If the dice result is a 4 or higher, we add a zombie token to the objective. And of course, we're going to have 5 rounds in which to do this, and 6 morale. So if our morale runs out, we lose the game, and if our rounds run out, we'll lose the game. There are a lot of different ways to lose morale in order to lose the game, but I'll talk about those as we come up to them. So the first thing to talk about is, of course, I was talking about rounds there. So this game is broken down into rounds, and you can see on your player reference sheet, it does give you a summary of how the game is made up. So the rounds are made up of, first, the player turns phase, at which we'll have 3 stages. Then we have the colony phase, and then it would be the next round. The player aid also helpfully tells you what all the different actions you can do are. Also, there's a reminder here for the player to your right to draw a Crossroads card at the beginning of your turn. This is important to note because it isn't in the round summary. So the first stage of a round is to reveal the crisis card. So you have here the crisis deck. You'll simply flip over the top card and that will become your crisis for the round. So for example, the card I've turned over here is Blizzard. So you've got the name here. Then here it tells you what you need in order to complete the crisis. So we need a number of fuel equal to number of non-exiled players. So at the beginning of the game, that would be 2 players. So we'd need to put in 2 fuel cards. Then below that, it tells us what will happen if we fail to meet this crisis. So in this case, all non-exiled survivors won't be able to move until the end of the next round. Also, we'd lose 1 morale. And of course, morale is like our life. That gets to 0, we lose the game. Additionally, at the bottom here, it has an optional thing. In this case, it says add 2 additional fuel cards to gain 1 morale for preventing the crisis. So if we have 2 more than are required for the crisis, we'll gain a morale. And most cards have that on. So having revealed that, we will then leave that there, and I'll talk about how we contribute cards to the crisis when I go through the action to do so. Next, each player will take all the dice from their unused action dice section of their player aid, which is the bottom right. So at the beginning of the game, each player will have 4 dice, and they'll roll those dice and then place those in their unused action dice pool on the bottom left of the player reference sheet. At this stage is when you would either lose or gain dice dependent on the number of survivors you have. So the number of dice you'll be rolling should equal the number of survivors plus 1. So as I say at the start of the game, that will be 4 dice, but if a player loses a survivor, they would lose a dice at this point. Or if they have gained a survivor, they would gain a dice at this point. Then each player will take their turns, starting with the first player. Before they do anything, the player to their right will draw a Crossroads card from the top of the deck, and they will read this card. So for example, here we have the Army card. The player who drew this card would read the top section to themselves so that no one else knows what it is. This will give the criteria for whether or not this card takes effect. Now, there are lots of different things that could be the criteria, so I'm not going to go through them. One of the most common things is having survivors at a specific location or having a specific survivor. Most of these Crossroads cards, if they trigger, you will then present the active player whose turn it is with the options given. So if it has a thumbs up or thumbs down option, that means that all players get to have a vote. So they can vote thumbs up for the thumbs up option or thumbs down for the thumbs down option. And this card also states there is an alternative to voting. Other cards such as this Wounded Survivor will state option 1, option 2, etc. And this means that the player whose turn it is gets to pick one of those 2 options as to what happens, and none of the rest of the players get any say in that. So once the player to the right of the person whose turn it is has had a chance to read that card and say whether or not it triggers, the player may then continue their turn. Of course, they may be interrupted by the player to their right at any time to say that the Crossroads card has now triggered. So in a player's turn, there are lots of options for actions they can perform as given on your player reference sheet. So as you can see, the actions you can perform are broken down into two types. You have actions that require you to use one of your action dice, which would be in your unused action dice pool. And when you use it, you would put it into your used action dice pool. And then you have actions that do not require an action dice and that you can do at any point on your turn. There is no rules about at which point you can do any of these actions. You can do them whenever you want. Also, you can do these actions multiple times. So let's talk about attack. So if there is a survivor or zombie at a location that you wish to attack. So let's say we had Maria Lopez at the school here with these zombies. She could, as an action, perform an attack. In order for her to perform the attack, we would need to expend a dice with a value of 4 or more from our unused dice pool, because her attack value is 4+. If we were using John Price here, we would only need a 3 or more. But we're using Maria, so we would take this dice with a 4 side and put it on our unused action dice. We have then performed the attack, so we would simply kill this zombie. However, there is a price for attacking this zombie here for Maria. So yes, she's able to instantly do it, there's no concerns there. But whenever you attack a zombie, you have to roll the exposure dice. So I would roll this dice. If it came up blank, nothing would happen. If it came up with the blood drop symbol, then Maria would take a wound. So I would take a wound token and I would sit it on Maria's card. 3 wounds will kill a survivor. If it comes up with the frost symbol here, then I would give her a frostbite wound, and it's the same token as the wound token, but it's the opposite side, so it's got the frost token. The difference between a frostbite wound and a normal wound is that whenever you receive a frostbite wound, from then on, at the start of each of your turns, that survivor will take an additional normal wound. However, they can be cured in the normal way. The final option when rolling the exposure dice is the tooth here. And what that means is that the character has been bitten and they immediately die. But not only do they immediately die, if there is any other survivors at the same location, so let's say Carla was also here, and let's say John was also here at the school. It was very crowded at the school this day when Maria was bitten by a zombie and she dies. Now, there's a risk of this bite spreading to the other survivors at that location. So the way this would work is the survivor at that location with the highest leadership score, which between John and Carla here would be Carla with 22. The player controlling that survivor has a choice. They could immediately kill that survivor, taking them off the board and losing the card from their play area, or they can roll the exposure dice. However, if they roll anything other than a blank, that survivor dies and the bite continues to spread. If they just choose to kill that person, that would end the spread of the bite. It's important to note here that we're talking about survivors dying, and whenever a survivor would die, such as Maria dying here because she's been bitten, you lose a morale. And of course, if you reach 0 morale, you lose the game. There are some item cards and also some character abilities, such as Maria's here, which will allow you to perform attacks without needing to roll for exposure, and it will state do not roll for exposure. So for example, at the school, Maria could use a 1+ once per round to kill 1 zombie without rolling for exposure. Otherwise, it would all work the same way. You'd simply remove the zombie. So let's say I didn't perform the attack action though. Let's say I wanted to perform the search action. When you perform a search, and you have to be at one of the 6 non-colony locations in order to perform a search, you simply discard a dice equal to the survivor who is at that location's search value or higher. So for Maria here, she has a 2+. So this 4 that we were going to use to attack, we'll instead use to do a search. So we put that in our used action pool, at which point Maria may take the top card off of that location's deck. So we have here school, and we see that it is a junk. Now Maria has a choice at this point. She could take this item and put it in her hand, or she could choose to put it on the bottom of the deck. Or there is a final option. She could choose to make noise. Now to make noise, you would take one of your noise tokens and you would place it on one of the 4 noise location spots next to the deck. At which point you get to draw an additional card. So now Maria has 2 cards that she's looking at. So she now has a choice to either keep one of these cards and put the other one to the bottom of the deck, or to put both of them on the bottom of the deck. Either way, she can only keep 1 card. She can continue to make noise up to 4 times until all the noise token spots are filled. And each time she would get to draw an additional card, but she would still only be keeping 1 card. However, there is a price to pay for making noise. And this happens during the colony phase, and I'll talk about it more there, but every time you make noise, there is a chance that you will draw additional zombies to that location. When you take a card into your hand, you don't need to reveal it to any of the other players. The next action you can perform is Barricade, which is one of these little tokens here. Now, you can use any value of dice, even a 1, to place a barricade. So let's say we did have this 1, which is very low, and we couldn't do any fighting or searching with it. We could still use this 1 by moving it to our used action dice area to place a barricade where there is one of our survivors. So we could place a barricade at the colony here, or if we had Maria here at the school still, we could place a barricade at the school, and you would simply place the barricade token where you would have placed a zombie. Now, you can't barricade if there are no spaces. So let's say all 4 spaces at the school here were filled, Maria would not be able to place a barricade. The purpose of barricades is that when a zombie would be put out on that barricade, instead the barricade disappears instead of the zombie being placed. So it's in effect killing a zombie in advance without the risk of having to roll exposure. The next action you can do with dice is to clean waste, and again you can use any value, even a 1, to do this. So if we were part way through the game and in our waste pile here we had a load of used item cards, When we clean waste, we move the dice to the used action dice, and we must have a survivor at the colony to do this. We would then remove 3 cards from the waste pile. The reason this action is important is that during the colony phase, we will be checking the waste, and if we have 10 or more cards in the waste at that stage, we lose morale. And of course, if we get to 0, we lose the game. The final action you can do with a dice, and again this is no matter what the value of that dice, is to attract zombies. And the way that'll work is you just pick a location where you have a survivor. So let's say where we've got John Price here in the colony, and John will expend this 1 to the used action dice, and then we get to draw 2 zombies from any other location to the colony. So let's say John wanted to help Maria out here at the school. He could do an attract and draw 2 zombies from the school to the colony like so. Or let's say Maria here didn't like there being zombies at the colony. She could expend a dice to draw 2 zombies from the colony to the school. So that's all your options for actions that require dice that anyone can perform. But then of course we'll have survivors' special abilities such as Maria's here that have a number in brackets that will mean they can perform that if you use a die of that value. Now let's go through the choice of actions you have that don't require you to use any action dice, and you can have already used all your action dice and for them to be in your used action pool before you start doing any of these. So the first one is to play a card, and of course in your hand you have items, so you can choose to play any of these items at any point during your turn as long as it's legal to do so. And there are very few that you can't legally play. When you play an item, it has the type of card it is in the symbol here, the name of the item, and then the first bit of text here tells you where it goes when you play it. The majority will be it goes to the waste pile, and then it tells you what that card will actually do by placing this in the waste pile. So for example, with this fuel, you play this when moving a survivor you control, and you do not need to roll for exposure. And there are lots of different ones, such as food that can add food to your food supply so that you don't starve to death, medicine so that you can heal wounds, and there are also weapons that you can equip to characters, to your survivors, etc. The next action you can perform is to add a card to the crisis. Now, ideally, if you are not a betrayer, you'll be adding the card required for the crisis. So, for example, at the moment we have Blizzard out here, which wants fuel. So, as part of my turn, I could put any number of fuel cards I wanted face down in the crisis contributions. And they would then help towards resolving that crisis. Now, if you were a betrayer and for some reason wanted the colony to fail the crisis, you could put any other type of card, and that counts as -1 card of that type. It's important to note, especially with food, that there are some cards called food and a number. That is still only 1 card of that type, even if it was free food, for example. When, during the colony phase, we resolve the crisis, that's when you would total up how many are helping and how many are hindering. It's important to note that when you are putting cards into the crisis and discussing that with the other players at the table, that you are not allowed to say exact numbers that you are putting in. You can hint as to whether or not you're helping a little, a lot, etc., but you cannot specify exact numbers. Also, it's important that you play it face down if you are playing with 3 or more players due to the chance of a traitor. The next action you can do is to move a survivor. So I've been moving Maria a lot here, and you can do a move to a location and away from a location. You can do it as many times as you want, but there is a risk associated with moving during the dead of winter. It's very cold out there and there are zombies. It's dangerous. You could die from exposure. So you must roll the exposure dice just like when attacking a zombie. And all the rules I went through of what the different sides mean apply the same as when you're fighting. It's important to note with the bite, where that will spread to is the location you are travelling to, not the location you are travelling from. If Maria was travelling to the colony and got bit, it's a much greater risk because you have more survivors there than if she was moving to the school and got bit, because there are no other survivors at the school at this point. So I mentioned food, which you can play to the waste pile, and that will put food tokens, that are kind of cans of baked beans, in your food supply at the bottom right of the colony here. Now, one of the actions you can do is to remove a food token from the food supply to increase one of your unused action dice by 1 point. Now, it's important to remember you will need this food during the colony phase to feed the colony. So if you use it all increasing your dice value, you will starve. Next, you can request cards. So if, say, I needed a specific type of card such as food, or say I didn't have any medicine and I was wounded and I needed to heal myself, I could say, could someone please give me medicine? At which point anyone who had a medicine card and a survivor sharing a location with one of my survivors would be able to pass me a medicine card. And you can do this with any type of card: tools, food, fuel, weapons. The next action you have a choice to perform is hand off. Now, this is basically the same as request, but in reverse. You can choose to give someone an item. Then the final action is to vote to exile. Now, it's important to note that this would not apply in the game that we're setting up here or we'll be playing in our playthrough, because we're going to be doing a 2-player, which means it's a co-op and there is no betrayer, which means there is no reason to vote to exile. So the way a vote to exile would work is you would accuse another player of being a betrayer and say you wish to exile them. At which point there is a chance for everyone to have a brief discussion about whether or not they think that player that's been accused is actually the betrayer or not. Then you'll put your hands in and you'll either vote thumbs up or thumbs down. It's important to note that if you have a tie, it will be broken by whoever has the first player marker. And that's the same whenever you do a vote for anything, whether it's a thumbs up or thumbs down for a Crossroads card, or to vote for exile. So that is all the actions each player can perform during their turn. So we would start with the first player, they would perform all their actions, then play would pass to our second player, at which point the first player would have to draw a Crossroads card before that other player takes their turn. Now obviously if there were more players, it would be the player to the right. Then we move on to our colony phase. So the first thing you have to do in your colony phase is feed all the people you have at the colony using your food supply. So this is why you needed to pay food into your waste supply to put tokens in here, because you're going to need to take tokens out of here now to feed everyone at the colony. So the amount of food tokens you need is 1 per 2 survivors, and you will be rounding up on that. So in a situation like we have here, we have 5 survivors, so we would need 3 food tokens, and at the moment we have 5 in here. So we'd simply remove 3 tokens and that would be our food paid. No harm done. However, let's say we had the 5 people, but we only had 2 food here. That's not enough food. We're going to starve. Rather than removing any of our food tokens from here, What we instead do is we add one of these starvation tokens, which is like an empty can of fish apparently, and that would just sit in our food supply along with the food we already had there. Then you would lose morale for every starvation token you had there. So at the moment we had 1 starvation token, so we'd lose 1 morale. But let's say it's then the next round and we still only have 2 food in the supply. That's still not enough to feed those 5 people. So we add another starvation token. Now we have 2 there, so we'd lose 2 morale, putting us down to 3. And you can see how that would escalate very quickly and get very bad. It's important to note though, that even if we had a situation where we have 2 starvation tokens there, if we had the free food tokens, which we do now, in the food supply to feed everyone, we would remove those tokens and everyone is fed and we don't lose any morale despite there being those 2 starvation tokens there. Once we've done the food, we then check our waste pile. So on the colony here, we have our waste pile where we've been playing all our cards to, and we simply count the number of cards here. We have 5, which is fine. But if we had 10 here, we would lose a morale. Now, it doesn't matter how many above 10 you have. As long as you have 10 or more, you lose 1 morale. It doesn't matter if you get to 20, you don't then lose 2, etc. Then, having checked our waste, we then resolve the crisis. So what we do is we pick up all our crisis combination cards, we shuffle them up, and then one by one, we reveal what they are. So we had a fuel, that's good, we needed fuel. In fact, we need 2 fuel. Oh, look at that, we've got the 2 fuel we need. Oh, but we've got another card here, and that's a medicine. So obviously this wasn't just a 2-player game because someone put medicine in, and that means there was a betrayer involved wanting us to fail this crisis. But because this is 2 can play that game, we'd be doing a 2-player game. So we wouldn't have anyone putting any negatives in there. So the cards that pass would then be removed from the game and we'd simply remove this crisis for having completed it. If we had had 4 fuel, obviously, we would gain the morale, as it says, optional, add 2 additional cards to gain 1 morale. If we'd only had 1 fuel in there, we would have failed the crisis. And it's at this point that we would do anything noted under the fail terms for this card. So on this one, we wouldn't be able to move any non-exiled survivors until the end of the next round. And we would also immediately lose 1 morale. And of course, if we get to 0, that's the end of the game. Then we would add zombies. So let's start with the simplest of adding zombies, which is for these non-colony locations. Now, if there are no survivors there, no zombies appear. However, if there's a survivor there, for each survivor at that location, you put out an additional zombie. If we needed to put out another zombie on the school here, there's no space for this zombie to go because there's only 4 spaces and they're filled with zombies. So what would we then do? Well, at that point, that location is overrun. And what that means is that we kill the survivor at that location with the lowest leadership score. And of course, in this situation, there's just the 1. So that survivor would be removed from the game. And of course, every time a survivor dies, we lose morale. Now, also with these non-colony locations, as well as putting out a zombie for every survivor there, you also might put out a zombie for every noise token there. So for each noise token, which are these little ear ones here, that you have there, you roll a dice. So if the result of the dice is more than 3, such as this 4 here, no zombie would be put out. However, if it was 3 or less, you'd put an additional zombie there. So that's the zombies for these non-colony. Then we need to look at the colony. So, situation like we have here, we have 5 survivors. We would need to put out 3 zombies. And this is calculated in the same way as the food. So you put out 1 zombie per 2 survivors, rounding up. The way you place zombies when placing at the colony is you would go 1, 2, 3 for placing 3 zombies. If it was the next round and we needed to place 3 more zombies, we wouldn't go 4, 5 and 6. We would go 1, 2 and 3 again. If any single one of these numbers becomes overrun, we would kill a survivor in the same way. In the same way as we did at one of the non-colony locations. However, there is one exception. Because there might be helpless survivors, these little tokens here in the colony, if there are any of those, they'll die before one of our survivors that has a leadership score. But you do still lose morale for having a survivor die. If you need to put out a number of zombies more than 6, you would go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then say we were putting out 7, that 7th one would go on the 1, 8 on the 2, etc., going round. So you fill up and then you start at the beginning again. And that would be our adding of zombies. We would then check our main objective to see if our victory condition had been met. If it had, then yay, we've won the game. If not, we then continue. So after checking that, we would move our round marker down 1. If it gets to 0 and we have not completed our victory condition, we lose the game. Then you would pass the first player token to the person on the right. That's right. You'd expect it to move clockwise because your play order is moving clockwise, but actually the first player marker moves backwards. So what happens is that during each round, the player who goes last will then go first in the next round. So they're going to know they have 2 goes in a row in order to mess with all the other people if they're the betrayer. And that is then the end of the round, and we would go back to the player turns phase section, doing our reveal the crisis, roll our dice, take our player turns, then repeat our colony phase until either we run out of rounds or morale, or we meet the victory condition. And that is how you play Dead of Winter. I do hope that you have enjoyed this video, and of course if you have, please do check out the rest of the videos on the channel, as well as subscribing to the channel and sharing it with your friends and family. Also, please do check us out on social media. We are on Facebook and also on Twitter. And as always, thanks for watching and bye for now.